Hi everyone, my name is Hayden Alexander Butcher. Welcome back to Hang and Vibe. I'm using the new microphone again, and hopefully I don't have too many issues. I noticed that last time the audio was a little bit weird because if I take too long, if there's too long of a pause, it like boosts the volume a bunch to capture the background noise for some reason. So I don't know, I'm holding it further away from my face this time so that it's hopefully not too loud. There was just a lot of clipping in the audio last time, but hopefully I'm gonna experiment and see what works best. But anyways, this week we had Jacob Martin preach in the morning, and Jacob preached on Hebrews chapter 6 verses 11 through 20. And this was a sermon all about not losing hope. We see that in verse 11, which says, "We desire each one of you to show the same earnestness to have the full assurance of hope until the end." So there are three reasons to hope in this passage. The first reason to hope is a purpose, and by that that means God's purpose. This passage talks about God making a promise, and the promise that the writer is pointing to is the promise made to Abraham in Genesis 22, which is where he promises that God will bless Abraham with offspring, and that in his offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. And we also see an oath, and that's in Genesis 22 verse 16, when he says, "By myself I have sworn." So Hebrews 6 is pointing to this promise and this oath. And in verse 17 of Hebrews 6 it says, "When God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie," and then so on. And the two unchangeable things that are referred to are the promise and the oath. And we know that these are unchangeable because God himself is unchangeable. He is immutable. He cannot change. Therefore, his purposes cannot change. But the fact that he made a promise and that he sealed it with an oath, it's not in order to make his promise unchangeable. It's already unchangeable. But the oath serves the purpose of boosting our assurance. So it's for our benefit. And it is for our benefit, even though God made this promise to Abraham. And even though he says that it is for his offspring, we as Gentiles are not Abraham's offspring by blood, but Galatians chapter 3 verse 29 says, "If you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise." So this promise and this oath should give us hope because we are Abraham's offspring in Christ. And so we are heirs of this promise. The second reason to hope is that we have a refuge in Christ. Hebrews chapter 6 verse 18 says that we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. And the reference to a refuge is a reference to Deuteronomy chapter 19, which talks all about the laws for having cities of refuge, which these cities they all belonged to the Levites. And so anyone who had committed an accidental sin, like manslaughter, an accidental murder, they could flee to these cities of refuge, and the priests, the Levites, would mediate between them and God. They would stand between the people and God, and they would make atonement by a sacrifice for them. But this passage is telling us that God is our refuge. And at first glance, we might not understand how this works, because if God is the one whom we have sinned against, why would we flee to him for refuge? If he's the one that we've offended, how can it be safe for us to seek refuge in him? But again, we have a mediator in our priest, Christ. Christ stands between us and God, and he mediates on our behalf by not making a sacrifice, but by being our sacrifice. And that leads to the third reason for hope, which is that we have in Christ a priest. Verse 19 and 20 say, "We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." So this is saying that Jesus goes into the inner place behind the curtain, which is the most holy place of the temple and the tabernacle. This was the Holy of Holies. It was the most special part of the temple where the high priest only entered once a year to make atonement for the people. And it's where God's most concentrated presence was, in a way. And when Christ died on the cross, the curtain that separated the inner place was actually torn in half from top to bottom. And is this good news or bad news? The inner place, the most holy place, was, very holy. And there's a reason the high priest only entered once a year, because it was very dangerous to be in such close proximity to the presence of God. People would die in the inner place. But that's why Jesus has gone ahead as a forerunner on our behalf. He went into the inner place to make atonement for us, and that's why we are allowed to enter into the inner place, because if we are in Christ, then we can safely go before the presence of God without fear of dying and being punished. So those are three reasons that this passage gives us to hold on to hope. And the evening sermon was actually really similar. This was a sermon preached by Wayne Veenstra. He preached on Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 through 15, which also deals with Abraham, and it deals with God's promise to Abraham. But in this passage, we are seeing Abraham kind of being challenged by God's promise, and being challenged with whether or not he believes that the promise is actually going to be fulfilled. Because Abraham and his wife Sarah are old at this point, and they still haven't had the child that God had promised to them. But God appears along with two angels, and basically tells Abraham that at this time next year, Sarah is going to have a child. And Sarah overhears God telling Abraham this, and she laughs because it's so unbelievable. And we can frequently hear God's promises this way and feel kind of cynical. I know I certainly struggle with cynicism a lot, and I struggle with resignation and just the kind of attitude and outlook that things haven't changed so far, so how can I expect anything to change ever? But this passage is trying to teach us not to lose hope and not to be resigned and cynical. And it gives us a couple of reasons why we can trust God with his promises. First is God's heart of friendship. When God appears here with two angels, they appear in person, face to face with Abraham, and Abraham prepares a meal for them. And this is a unique appearance of God in the Old Testament. Up to this point, Abraham had not seen God in person, or I don't think really anywhere else in the Old Testament does God come down to have a meal with his people. But he does so in this instance because having a meal, as we've talked about in previous sermons, it's a sign of fellowship. It's an intimate activity. It shows friendship and kinship. It also, in that culture, it was also a way of confirming a covenant. When two parties made a covenant together, they would have a meal together, and that was a kind of a way to solidify the covenant. But I think especially the fellowship aspect is what we want to see here, and to see that God is revealing himself as a friend. He's a friend to Abraham, and he's a friend to all his people. And that's one way that we can trust that God will keep his promises, because he makes his promises from a heart of friendship. But the second reason we can trust God when he makes his promises is because of God's arm of power. One of the points that God makes in this passage is in the form of a question. He says, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" So he's showing that, not only is he willing to bless us and to help us, but he's also able to. His promises are not just for show. He can actually accomplish them. So it's all very encouraging. One point that Wayne Veenstra also made is that there is a difference between what God has promised to do and what he has not promised to do. There are a lot of things that God might do and certainly can do, but hasn't necessarily promised to do. And so it's not like we can, charge God with wrongdoing if he doesn't fulfill the things that we hope he will do. But I think it's important to just try to cling to the things that he has promised to do, because the things that he has promised to do, we know that he will do. So this past Saturday, yesterday, was our annual Faith and Life Conference, which is a conference that is held by both my church and Emmanuel Fellowship. And it was hosted at Emmanuel Fellowship. And there were two speakers, Dr. Alan Strange and Dr. Harrison Perkins. Alan Strange is the interim president of Mid-America Reformed Seminary. He gave two talks that were they bookended the talk by Harrison Perkins. But the first talk that Dr. Alan Strange gave was the title of it was "Called by Christ." It was a exposition of Matthew chapter 11 verses 20 through 30, where the first thing that Jesus does in this passage is that he is condemning the cities around for not believing in him. So he says, woe to you, Chorazin, woe to you, Bethsaida. He compares them to Tyre and Sidon. It says that, in fact, if the works that he had done in Chorazin and Bethsaida were done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented, and it'll be better for them than it will be for Chorazin and Bethsaida in the day of judgment, because the sins that they committed in Chorazin, Bethsaida, and he also mentions Capernaum, the sin that they committed was unbelief. And he's saying that the sin of unbelief is worse than the sins that were committed in Sodom, Tyre, and Sidon. And that's just very convicting, and it should remind us of how important it is to believe in Christ. But then he turns to his followers, and he gives them some insight into his heart. In the Bible, the heart is an expression of the whole being, so it includes your thoughts and your feelings. It's not opposed to your mind. In our culture, we typically look at the heart is where we feel things, and the mind is where we think things. But in this culture, the heart was to signify both. And Jesus describes himself as gentle and lowly. So to break those up, first, Jesus is gentle, and it's a remarkable thing to hear that Jesus is gentle, because for a person to be gentle is fine. For a person to be lowly, that's what we are. We're creatures, so of course we're gentle and lowly. But Jesus is God, so he is holy. But for him to be holy and at the same time gentle and lowly, they're not at odds with each other. His holiness is what makes him gentle. And this is opposed to how we typically view God. We typically think that he accepts us because he has to, in a way, because of Christ's sacrifice and justification. Because we are declared righteous in Christ, we can think that God only accepts us because of a technicality. But it's not that he accepts us because he has to. He really wants to accept us. He really does love us and really does care for us. And then what it means for him to be lowly, it does mean humble, but not in the same way as like humility as a virtue, but as like a circumstance, as in like somebody who's of lowly estate, or poor, destitute. And of course we can see that of Jesus when he was on earth, when he was poor carpenter's son who was born in a manger and went through life without a home. He was clearly in a lowly estate at that point, but is he still lowly, even though now he has been exalted and he's been ascended on high and seated on the throne? Does he still associate with us in our lowly estates? But that's why he is describing himself as lowly in heart, because it's in his heart. It's his very character that is lowly and that is accessible and approachable. As we heard in the sermon, towards Abraham, he was a friend, and he calls us his friends. Yeah, so this is just a nice talk, hearing about how Jesus is gentle and lowly. And he based a lot of his talk on the book Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland, which is a really great book, and I would recommend it to everyone. The second talk was by Dr. Harrison Perkins, who is the pastor of Oakland Hills in Farmington Hills, I think. He started the talk by giving an analogy of computers and how the actual, computer portion of what we call a computer it's actually, just a small, circuit board that we don't even really see. But the only way that we can interact with the computer is by, connecting things like a monitor and a mouse and a keyboard. Those are the interface of the computer, the way that we are able to engage with it. And he gave that analogy to ask the question, how do we interface with Christ? He is in heaven, we are on earth. How can we interact with him? How can we see him and touch him and hear him? And the answer that he gave is that we interface with Christ by the means of grace. The means of grace are divided into the Word, the sacraments, and prayer. So, Dr. Perkins went through each of these. First, the Word, which is how Christ speaks to us. And particularly, he speaks to us via heralds and ambassadors. Back in the day, rulers, kings and queens and rulers would use heralds and ambassadors to convey messages to the people. And the messages that they conveyed were authoritative because they came from the rulers. And that is how God conveys his word to us. He uses preachers and he uses fellow Christians to convey his authoritative word to us. And then secondly, the sacraments. We are visual creatures. Right now we walk by faith, but faith will give way to sight because we were made to see and to behold God. And the sacraments are a way in this life to serve to show us spiritual truths visibly and tangibly. And the truths that these sacraments show us are that Christ gathers us. Baptism is the first sacrament, and it shows that Christ gathers us by baptizing us into him, into Christ. And he uses his heralds and his ambassadors to do this. But even though it is the pastor who does the baptizing, it is in Christ. So therefore it is Christ who is baptizing his people. And then the second sacrament is the Lord's Supper, which also teaches us that Christ gathers us, because we gather together to take the Lord's Supper. And again, it is Christ who hosts the supper, even though it is through a herald/ambassador. It is the preacher who goes up front and distributes the supper, but Christ is the one who is the host. And then the third means of grace is prayer, which is how Christ hears us. So a computer, even if we have, the monitor and we can see kind of everything that goes on in the computer, we can only interact so much by seeing it. We have to have a way to provide input, and that's, the mouse and the keyboard. And prayer is the way that we interact with God. So yeah, those 3 means of grace are the way that we can interact with God. And Dr. Alan Strange gave a 3rd talk. The title of this talk was Commissioned by Christ. I forgot to mention the title of the 2nd talk was Equipped by Christ. I didn't take very good notes on the 3rd talk, but he did kind of go off on tangents a lot, so it was hard to take notes. But he talked about the Great Commission. He started out talking about what makes the Great Commission so great, and the things that make it great are its breadth, which is the breadth of the Great Commission is global. The commission is to make disciples of the whole world. But then it's great in depth. The commission to make disciples is to teach them all the things that that Jesus had commanded them. And so the depth of the commission is that we would grow in holiness. But then I guess the ultimate thing that makes the Great Commission so great is the Lord of this commission. It's Jesus who gave the Great Commission, and he says that he has all authority in heaven and on earth to give us this commission. And without Christ as the Lord of this commission, it'd be pointless for us to do everything that he's telling us to do. But he gives it purpose. So yeah, it was a nice conference. I am glad that I got to go to it. I always look forward to these conferences, and I look forward to going again next year. Now for the music. The first artist this week is Grizzly again. I know I talked about Grizzly in the winter, but they have a lot of songs that I also like to listen to in the spring. So here's Grizzly again. The first song is called Easier from the album Yellow House. This one has a very pleasant folk sound and some lovely classical instruments. Very nice vocals. There's some nice banjo in some parts. And it ends with some nice vibraphone. I think that's what the instrument is. I don't know for sure, but I guess it sounds like a vibraphone. The next track is called Reprise, also from Yellow House. This also just has some very nice banjo. I like the vocals at the end. There's kind of ominous, deep vocals towards the end. And then the song Southern Point from Vacatimist. I don't know how to pronounce it, but that's the album title. This is one of my favorite tracks by them. There's a beautiful guitar riff that leads into the chorus. And then in the chorus, there's just some cool drums and bass. After the chorus, another cool bass line comes in. And then there's just a really epic bridge section, which kind of builds up. It builds up to a powerful section with some really awesome guitar. And then it quiets down again, and the bridge goes the second time with the build up. But this time it builds up, and instead of the powerful section, it actually cuts out, and it's just the beautiful solo acoustic guitar. The next track is 2 Weeks, which is probably one of their most famous tracks. And it's very Beach Boys-esque, I feel like, with the vocal harmonies. Has a beautiful chorus. Next track is Fine for Now. I love this track a lot. It has some pretty guitar and some nice harmonious vocals.
There is time, so much time.
There's a really awesome, powerful chorus. And then there's some other parts that have a cool kind of jazzy sound.
It's all or nothing, then let me go.
And it gets really heavy at the end, like just the hammering of the guitar. It sounds really heavy. Cheerleader has some lovely vocals, lovely vocal melodies in this track. About Face has some really cool guitar parts. And then the track While You Wait for the Others. This one has some nice guitar and I think a mellotron, that kind of flute sound. When we had our episode with Jeremy, he mentioned that sometimes that flute sound is a mellotron, and I think that's what it sounds like in this song.
As long as you like, or just wait out the evening.
And then this one has a pretty heavy-ish chorus as well, and some nice vocals. And then the last track from The Catamist is I Live With You. This has a nice soft verse section with some nice guitar. And there's a cool like saxophone build up, which leads to another verse section. And then this one also has just a really heavy chorus with some nice bass. Last track by Grizzly Bear I want to mention is called Losing All Sense from the album Painted Ruins. And this one has a really cool beat and just an amazing bass line. The bass really stands out in this one. And it has a pretty chorus.
Could I ask of you not to cut into me?
The next artist is Damien Jurado. I actually saw him live. Mike and I saw him live at Bell's, but he was just playing like an acoustic set, like just him by himself with an acoustic guitar, and I didn't really like it that much. I love his music, but I love all the instruments that he uses in his music, and so when he was just playing his songs with nothing but an acoustic guitar, it kind of took a lot away from his songs. But the first song I want to talk about is called Diamond Sea from the album Maricopa. This one is a beautiful, slow piece with some lovely piano and guitar.
Tell me that you want me, will you throw me back lightly into
And there's some nice trumpet in some parts.
sea?
The next track is called Return to Maricopa from the album Brothers and Sisters of the Eternal Sun. There's some cool synth bass in this one and some nice vocals. And there's a especially cool part where the bass kind of is more pronounced, and I like the sound of it. The next track is Metallic Cloud from this album. This one has some nice guitar and piano, and then it also has some nice, what I assume is vibraphone in some parts. And then the track Planes to Crash. This one is really cool. This has some lovely acoustic guitar. It has some nice lyrics. It talks about him becoming a Christian, I think. I'm pretty sure he's a Christian. I mean, the lyrics of this song would indicate so. And even the album title, Brothers and Sisters of the Eternal Sun, to me just kind of sounds like a Christian title.
Light beneath my feet, show me the way.
The next song is called Lon Bella from the album Visions of Us on the Land. And I really like this track just for there's one guitar line that I really like in it. Next track is called Allocate from the album The Horizon Just Laughed. This is a pretty nice chill track, and it switches back and forth between two different vocal melodies. I like the second vocal melody that comes in.
Once we were lost and we never came back. I can only exist so long.
And then Percy Faith from this album. This is actually the first song I ever heard by him, and it's one of my favorites. I really love the violin melody that comes in throughout this song. And then the last one from this album I like is called 1973. So it has a nice chord progression, kind of a sad sounding chord progression. And there's some beautiful bells in the background of some parts.
Never be the man she desires. Too
missed connections in the Amtrak station. I walked out the door without delay.
The lyrics, there's one line that always kind of hits me hard, and it's the line, "Charles, my best is not enough. Today I'm finally giving up."
Charles, my best is not enough. Today I'm finally giving up. Oh, Lucy,
From the album What's New, Tomboy, I like the song Birds Tricked into the Trees. It just has a beautiful chord progression and some nice bass.
We both saw the signs right before us.
And then the song The End of the Road from this album, it just has a lovely chorus.
And the road, it is long. I can't go it alone.
Okay, and then a few songs from the artist Lord Huron. I like the song Ends of the Earth from his album Lonesome Dreams. I don't know if it's a solo artist or a band. I should have looked it up, but anyways, this track has some nice vocal harmonies in the verse section.
Out there's a land that time don't command. Wanna be the first to ride. No time.
And then a cool, like, adventurous sounding chorus.
To the ends of the earth, would you follow me? There's a world that was meant for us.
And then I like the guitar line that comes in after the chorus. The song Meet Me in the Woods from the album Strange Trails. This is another nice track. It's kind of has this, there's two songs. There's another song called Love Like Ghosts that has like the same kind of chord progression and the same melodies. But I like this track better. So this, yeah, just has a lovely chord progression and it has a cool chorus. And then I really like the part after the chorus with the just melody of it. And then a bunch of songs from the album Long Lost. I like the song Mine Forever. It has some nice guitar in the intro. A nice vocal melody in the verses.
If you ever wanna see my face again, I wanna know. If you ever get along.
And then it has a nice chorus as well. Love Me Like You Used To is a good song. It has a really nice vocal melody in the verse.
I open up your door. Will you know me from the rest? Will you let me lay beside you? Will you grant
And in the chorus as well.
love me like you used to, and I'll praise you like I should. Love me if you choose to.
And there's a nice guitar melody that comes in at some parts. The title track, Long Lost, has some cool violin in the intro. A nice vocal melody in the verse section.
Leave me where the light pours down through the trees like rain. Let it wash.
And it also has a pretty chorus.
Send me to the mountains.
20 Long Years is a nice song. This one also just has a really nice chorus.
I got along for a while, I guess, but it took everything I had.
And then Drops in the Lake. I love the vocal melody in this one.
Lonely days fall like drops in the lake of our love. I just want.
And it also has a cool chorus. There's some parts that have some cool, like, ghostly vocals that I think sound really cool. Alright, and 3 bonus tracks. The first one is called Polygyne by Efterklang. This has a beautiful intro. There's like an ominous transition from the intro into this second part. And this part has some cool, like a cool kind of industrial beat and some awesome like oboe. So in this part of the song, there's some cool sub bass that comes in with the vocals. That sounds really cool. There's a music video to this track that's really interesting, and I love it's all just like graphics, like just visual. It's like a visualizer almost, and I love how it kind of puts the music into visuals. Towards the end, there's a cool part with some kind of eerie, kind of intense vocals. Next bonus track is My Broken Heart by Noah and the Whale. And it just has a really pretty melody, especially the part with the trumpets. I love the melody of that part. And then the track All Ashore by Punch Brothers has a fantastic intro with some lovely folk instruments. It has a nice folk sound throughout, and some nice vocals.
That he burns like a meteor through a night of his own diversions, hoping a place.
I always love the lyrics of this song. I get really emotional there's two different parts. The first part, there's the line, "Love, I know I promised more than this."
Singing love, I know I promised more than this.
And then at the end of the song, it kind of repeats that, but with a twist, and it says, "Love, I don't need any more than this." And I don't know, it just makes me kind of emotional, because it's like, I get the sentiment of, you feel insufficient and feel like you're not providing all that you can, but then the flip side is that, your partner is like reassuring you and saying like, basically all I need is you. Like I'm happy just to be with you. And I don't know, I guess that just is emotional to me, because I guess, I want that.
Bedroom floor singing love I don't need anymore than this.
But yeah, that's this week, and hopefully the audio quality was good in this episode. I'll listen back to it and make any adjustments necessary for the next episode. But stay tuned for that, and in the meantime, check out the Spotify playlist in the description for all the songs that I recommended in this episode. And yeah, I hope you all have a good week, and see you next time.